Hi everybody, this is River Fox from Bullets and Beer. Today we're going to look at the Walther P.38, which is a war horse from the German army that went into retirement after World War II, and it was brought back from the dead. So I asked myself, what beer would accommodate such a interesting firearm? A war horse brought out of retirement and a sour ale revived from the dead. What do these two things have in common? More than what meets the taste. So here we have a Walther P.38, or in this variation, I guess technically a Walther T1. These guns were originally designed in 1938, or at least adopted by the German army in 1938, and then put into mass production in 1940. After World War II, they stopped being made because, well, you know, if you lose a war, you kind of can't make any weapons. And then when West Germany started rearming itself in 1956, they contracted Walther to make more of these. And so in 1957, they returned to the scene, and the Bundeswehr, it was the new German army, adopts them as the Walther P1, or Pistole 1, or the first pistol. And but Walther didn't change how they were marking the slides, and so this is still technically marked a Walther P.38. So P1, P.38, you can take what you pick. I like calling it P.38. And here we have Goodwood's Hemp Gose Ale. Wow, this is brewed in Louisville, Kentucky, and it's this old style, the Gose style, which was this German thing that was super popular in one city, in Leipzig, in the 17 and 1800s, and then it like died out. World War II, no one was really brewing it because he had to focus on war beers, and then the city, Leipzig, which is in Saxony, is taken over by the Soviets, and then the East Germans, and the East Germans don't really want to open up a new brewery, or if they do, then it's like under their state brewing consortium. It's a whole thing. But anyways, Gose almost goes extinct, and there's only like one or two companies that are brewing them, and then they come back to life. And with this new craft brewing revolution, people are always trying to do something crazy and wild, and you can usually do that with an ale. And so this sour ale, which we'll get into the particulars in a bit, this sour ale kind of comes back in vogue in the United States, and particularly in Kentucky, where we can use hemp, which used to be a cash crop of this state. And that's pretty nifty. Well, let's get into tasting this beer, or excuse me, ale, and see what we got here. Yeah. The way I poured it is that it's not a particularly cloudy drink. You know, you can see through it. I've got an amber color to it. Just like a medium amber, decent sized head to it. And already smelling it, I know this is going to be sour. Like, I kind of get the idea of like a Berliner Weisse in my head, or maybe like a Belgian like Lambic. You know, one of those really like kind of like sour and spunky kind of beers. Gotta say, this is definitely an ale. And the first thing that hits your mouth is like this wave of sourness, and it kind of sits on the sides of your tongue. And then you get your aromas sort of towards the end there. But I don't know enough about flavor and taste to tell you exactly what's in here. But I can read a can. It says that they use coriander and lemon peel and hemp seeds, or I imagine hemp hearts, or the meat of the seed in here to flavor this thing. And that goes back to the style and the way that Gose was brewed. So the Gose style kind of is first documented around 1000 AD in a town called Goslar in Niedersachsen, Lower Saxony in Germany. This was an old mining town, and they had this like salty river called the Gose. People would brew a top fermented beverage from the water of that river. The way that they do it is they put it in these like really weird open bottles, like with a round, wide base and then a very long neck, and they wouldn't cork it. And they take, you know, their malt or hops or whatever the heck they're using, and they mix it with the water and put a little bit of coriander in there, and they'd set it out to ferment on its own from the air in the cellar. And that's kind of crazy today. You know, we think of all these hygiene standards that we have. Eventually, you get some sort of yeast brewing in that little stew, and it would rise to the top and then form its own cork in the bottle. And so it kind of sealed itself, but you still had this kind of period of like, we don't know what the hell is gonna go into this drink. And for some insane reason, people loved it. It was like this like sour, tart, like punch to the stomach kind of thing that, you know, you can't really drink anywhere else at the time. And it finds its way to all these little taverns in Leipzig, and people there love it. I mean, this city is a romantic era city. If you think about German romanticists like Goethe and Schiller, well, Goethe writes about having Gose, and he talks about how he loves it and spent many an hour in the Gose and Schenke, or these like little like Gose taverns. It's just kind of crazy, like open air yeast fermentation to make a beer or an ale. You'd think like you'd probably get sick or something. Well, I imagine that's why they use the coriander, because that would boost the immune system with vitamins K, A, and C. So anyways, was it a health drink or was it a poison? It's kind of what your opinion on alcohol and beer itself is. I feel like, you know, everything in moderation. So, excuse me. So Gose began to lose its fashion in the late 19th century. And by World War II, there were only a handful of Gose and Schenke around in Leipzig. And this was a totally regional beer. And as, like I said, grain demands went more towards a wartime supply, and little comforts and amenities like a sour kind of brew were overlooked. When the region in Leipzig fell into Soviet hands, there was only one brewery still around. And I believe that place was Würzler, but I'm not quite sure here. And even that had to close its doors in 1966. But in the 80s, a Leipziger named Lothar Goldhahn decided that he would open up another Gose and Schenke. He got permission from the VOB to open up a Gose and Schenke. And right after the 80s, you know, you have the fall of the Berlin Wall, and East Germany becomes West Germany. Or, well, wait, no, East Germany becomes part of the new Federal Republic. So you get this new capitalist society going on there. Well, Gose and Schenke are popping up all over the place in Leipzig, and there are still a few there today. As it becomes popular again over there, it becomes popular in the United States. Like I said before, craft brewers find the ability to do something with a complex flavor profile, and they like that, and they get the idea to do something even crazier with complex flavor profiles. The Gose, in its European variation, is known for its sweet, sour, and salty kind of flavor. And I mean, I'm not necessarily tasting a lot of salt in this one, but it still has a wild profile that I haven't seen in any Berliner Weisse or Belgian Lambert. That's where we are today, and then this one is made by Goodwood Brewing in Louisville, Kentucky. And this used to be the Bluegrass Brewing Company, which started in, I think, the early 90s, maybe late 80s. And then they became Goodwood in like well, hell, I can remember when they switched their name, sometime in the 21st century. Now they're making their new brews, and they're focusing on the way that the beer is aged in wooden barrels, and sometimes the wooden barrels were used to make other alcoholic drinks. I mean, bourbon barrel, of course, is going to be something you're going to see in Kentucky, but also I think there's like a cognac barrel brew that they have, maybe a brandy too, but they also produce this crazy, you know, sweet and sour hemp Gose. So this was the first modern military caliber double-action semi-automatic pistol. But what basically what that means, and if you've seen my Walther P.38 video, then I think I talked about it there, is that you can pull the trigger with the hammer down, and it both pulls back the trigger and drops the hammer. So this pistol comes complete with a decocker, so decocker safety. Okay, so you have it hammer cocked, you can safely decock, and then the idea is that you can have a loaded gun, round in the chamber, and carry it with reasonable safety. You don't have to worry about the hammer dropping and firing the pistol like you could with like Browning semi-automatics. But the thing is that you're advised not to use the safety decocker if you have a late war Walther P.38. Well, Walther used slave labor at his plant in Thuringen, And slaves don't really want to make a good gun for someone who's enslaving you, and they could have defective or crystallized safeties. So that when you decock it, you actually fire the gun. So if you saw my last video on the Walther PP, you might recall that the Walther PP was the first semi-automatic double-action pistol. But that was in .32 ACP, and it wasn't really a good military caliber firearm. Walther had its great success with the Walther PP, but they didn't get any contracts with it, and the German army was looking for a new, easy to mass produce, military caliber semi-automatic pistol, like to replace the Luger P.38. And Walther was successful in that, and for a number of reasons, mainly that it's easy to manufacture these compared to the Luger P.38. And it kept the same aesthetic quality with an exposed front few inches of the barrel, and it did so pretty well. But of course it couldn't necessarily replace the Luger because they were still in production until 1943. If you want to see a good video on the development of the Walther P.38, I suggest checking out Forgotten Weapons video on Walther P.38 development, done by Ian McCollum, and he's a really good dude. So basically, the P.38 was Walther's big break. In 1938, they get accepted by the Wehrmacht to produce these, and in 1940, they get approval for mass production. And these were damn popular. They were produced at the Walther plant, the Mauser plant, in Brno, at FN even, and Manuvan, that same plant who produced the Walther PP in my last video. By the end of the war, they produced over 1 million of these things. So the end of the war means the end of German arms production. And that also includes the end of Walther P.38 production. But that doesn't last for long. 1956 comes around, the Bundeswehr is able to conscript troops universally, which also means that they need to arm troops. And that comes around because Germany, or West Germany, is accepted into NATO because NATO realizes that they need an ally on the front, or at least on the border with the Soviet Union, to fight them in the case of the heating of a Cold War. So we have a German army without any German arms. How do they produce this? Well, the Bundeswehr goes to Walther, who is already set up again in, now he's in Ulm. He took his factory and all of his patents from Turingen to Ulm after he fled the Soviets, because they surely would have hung his ass because of all the slaves he used. The German army doesn't necessarily have the will or funds to go and find another pistol design, so they fund Walther to use his P.38 in their new P1 pistol. Or they take the Walther P.38 and make it the P1. Well, Walther doesn't change the marking from P.38 to P1 until 1963. So from 1957 to 1963, you have all these P1s being produced under the designation, at least at the Walther plant, as P.38. And this is where this one comes in. This is a pistol from December 1960. And this was a Bundeswehr pistol, and I can show you in a minute, but P.38 becomes a P1, and this is what we have today. And this is a gun that was put out of commission after World War II and comes back in the scene. Of course, with some changes. They use an aluminum frame that's a little lighter, and they use a nice black coating, or a soft matte finish here, and then they do some soft anodizing of the slide. Later, they reinforced the receiver with a hex bolt somewhere around the trigger guard, and they do something else. I think they have like thicker slide walls, and and the serrations for the slide grip go beyond the safety decocker. So we have two things that, because of World War II, are put out of production, and then they come back in style after World War II because of the Cold War, or I guess because of the results of the Cold War in the Gose's case, and for my own kind of, I don't know, enjoyment out of this, is that they both find their way to Kentucky. Let's take a look at the pistol and get out on the range, but after I digest this alcohol. Here we have the safety decocker, and we have the hammer, let's see, slide release, and this is a nice little thing. This is a takedown lever that's right here. So what we can do is we can flip that to the front and then just slide off the slide and barrel. Well, there we go. Flip it upside down. And something interesting to me is that you get these dual recoil springs instead of a central one that's under the barrel in a Beretta M9. Because here we have a barrel that is on rails. So I think it might stabilize the movement of the barrel, because if you notice, it kind of has to slide like that. So it's a horizontal moving barrel instead of like a tilting barrel, like in Browning designs. And then just having two places that absorb the recoil might be more stable than one. Putting it back together, we can slide this little silly thing in there, and then we align the rails. Oh, and you got to make sure all these little levers are down, and then that barrel lock is pushed in, and you can, oh, and then there's always something that's stopping you when you're pushing back the slide. Okay, and you just pull back a little bit, flip back over the takedown lever, and there we have it. Oh, something also cool, heel release magazine, which is something that you see in a lot of like early 20th century European pistols, and a single stack magazine, only 8 rounds, compared to, say, contemporary designs, the Browning High Power, which had a double stack magazine in the same caliber too. Anyways, it's pretty nifty. Let's take this out on the range after I, finish off my beer. All right, so Walther P.38, lock and load. Switching off safety, I'm gonna do a double action pull for the first shot. Let's see here. Son of a bitch. What the f? That sucked. Alright, so I hope you all enjoyed that. The Walther P.38, the Hemp Gose style ale. 2 innovations that, as a consequence of World War II, went out of service and then came back. And they just happened to find their place in Kentucky. So please like, subscribe, and share. I'm River Fox, and thank you very much for watching.